the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Strategic Planning, National Development and Statistics, wonderful Professor Biman Prasad, Christian, Officer in Charge, ILO Office for the Pacific Island countries. I'm sorry, I didn't dare take your second name. Fearing I would pronounce it incorrectly. Dr. Naren Prasad, who represents the Director of Research, ILO Geneva. Participants from our Pacific family. Bulapinaka and Namaste. Since I am speaking before the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, let me accord to you all a very warm welcome. And I hope you will enjoy the Fijian hospitality while you are here. You know, the good part about the Pacific is that we are all like cousins. And that's how we treat each other. And that's how we greet each other. So it's a wonderful experience to have all of you here in one room, all of us from 11 countries. Ladies and gentlemen, before I go onto my presentation, let me just share with you very briefly. There are 2 PhDs. I am a simple teacher. Out of the half a century that I have worked, the first half was teaching, the second half was defending and fighting for workers' rights. And that was a big challenge. Big challenge because of the kind of government we had in the last 16 years. Last 16 years were very challenging for us who championed workers' rights in this country, because there were a host of breaches of basic rights of workers. And we are so grateful to ILO for always being there to defend us, to question the government regarding those breaches, those curtailment of the fundamental rights of workers. We are ever so grateful. I hope Dr. Prasad will take that message back. Thank you very much. The second thing I wanted to share with you is that all the 3 of us come from within the vicinity of 10 kilometers. From very rural, coastal Vanuatu. And all of us would have traveled to primary school by those treks, averaging at least 5 or 6 kilometers daily, one way, each way. So that's the kind of background we all come from. And I am very proud to share that with you this morning. We know the difficulties that the rural poor and the workers go through. And that is why we are very strong on social justice. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not an expert on statistics. Like I said, I am not an expert on policy development, but I am going to leave that to Honorable Professor and speak basically on decent work. So, I would like this morning to discuss a topic that is of utmost importance to our society: employment, industrial relations, and decent work. These 3 pillars are essential for the growth and development of any nation, and they play a significant role in ensuring social justice, economic stability, and a better quality life for all. First and foremost, let us reflect on the significance of employment. Employment is not merely having a job. It is having meaningful work that allows individuals to contribute to society, provide for their families, and fulfill their aspirations. It is the key to eradicating poverty, reducing inequality, building people's character, and fostering inclusive growth. However, in many parts of the world, unemployment remains a major pressing issue. We must strive to create more job opportunities, especially for the marginalized and vulnerable sections of society, and ensure that everyone has access to decent work. Ladies and gentlemen, decent work is a concept that encompasses several dimensions. It implies fair wages, safe working conditions, social protection, and opportunities for personal and professional development. It means treating workers with respect and dignity, regardless of their gender, race, or background. Decent work is not a luxury, ladies and gentlemen, it's not a luxury. It is a fundamental right that should be guaranteed to all individuals. When workers are provided with decent work, they are more likely to be productive, motivated, and committed, leading to increased efficiency, innovation, and overall economic growth. Industrial relations, on the other hand, refer to complex interactions between employers, workers, and government. It involves the negotiation and maintenance of employment relationships, the resolution of conflicts, and the promotion of harmonious workplaces. Strong and effective industrial relations systems are crucial to fostering cooperation, trust, and mutual understanding between stakeholders. The establishment of mechanisms for dialogue, collective bargaining, and dispute resolution, we can ensure that the interests of employers and workers are taken into account, leading to more productive and sustainable workplaces. However, achieving these goals is not without challenges. Rapid technological advancements, globalization, changing labor market dynamics, and the like have brought about new complexities in the world of work. The rise of the gig economy, automation, and digital platforms have raised concerns about job security, income inequality, and erosion of workers' rights. It is imperative that we adapt policies and practices to address these challenges and ensure that the benefits of technological progress are shared by all. Not that trickle-down effect that people talk about. You know what's trickle-down effect, eh? The funnel is, we don't want workers to live on the crumbs. We want them to have their fair share of the benefits that are produced through their labor. Ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic and other recent challenges have changed the way we work. Businesses have different operating contexts, and employers have varied needs. So do employees. The key is to better understand each other's needs and build mutual trust. That's the biggest challenge, building mutual trust. And for us, in the Fijian context, that trust had eroded very badly in the last decade or so. And I must admit that some employers took undue advantage of that period in terms of exploiting workers. And I'm a bit ashamed that the government was the worst employer in this regard, because the entire civil service was listed under essential services and their rights were taken away. Contracts were imposed, individual contracts, short-term contracts as well. And people were always worried about the job security. I'm happy to share with you that our government, as soon as we came in office, we removed the contracts, and civil servants now enjoy security of tenure until the age of 60. Ladies and gentlemen, the Fijian coalition government has given a clear commitment that we will be guided not by any dogma, but by an open-minded approach to understanding what works and why. This is central to our agenda for modernizing government, using information and knowledge much more effectively and creatively at the heart of policy making and policy delivery. Our coalition government is built on some clear values such as freedom, fairness, and responsibility. The government encourages trade union membership and tripartite consultations because it helps to foster social dialogue. Policies that encourage collective bargaining and good faith negotiations across industries and broader economy actually what our government supports. The Ministry of Employment, Productivity and Industrial Relations vision of decent work and sustainable employment for all accentuates the mission to promote decent work opportunities, ensure safe and healthy workplaces, enhance productivity, and encourage good faith employment relations. Collaboration among different stakeholders is essential, in particular to allow countries embarking in developing new labor market policies to leverage experiences of countries that have already made progress in addressing similar issues. Learning by doing and collective experimentation will foster agile convergence towards improved data quality to promote or develop new policies and evaluate the old ones. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think I have to convince anyone here of the value of an evidence-based approach to policy making. The advent of our new government in Fiji is clearly a good time to initiate evidence-based approach to public policy to move the country forward towards factual, accountable and transparent society, and at the same time removing misinformation, half-truths, non-consultative processes from contaminating our policies. My point is that good evidence can improve or neutralize political obstacles, thereby making reforms feasible. That is why we are a reformist government. We aim for an evidence-based approach as a center stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I must once again acknowledge ILO for organizing such a crucial training as this. This training fits very well in the current context, and I am pretty sure it is going to help in the institutional capacity building of member states, as well as representative organizations of employers and workers to facilitate meaningful and coherent social policies and sustainable development. From governments and international organizations to private sector entities and civil society, all players must work together to develop new methodologies, technologies, and partnerships to expand availability of quality data. In this regard, once again, I would like to acknowledge ILO for always being supportive to the Pacific Island countries in terms of providing the much needed funding, technical support, and capacity building of all the social partners. Friends, today as we gather here, I would like to further enlighten on our coalition government's belief in consensus solutions, consensus building solutions to all our pressing labor market challenges. We are committed to expediting the achievement of sustainable development goals, leading the country towards decent work and sustainable lifestyles. The coalition government, through the Ministry of Employment, Productivity and Industrial Relations, will work with the stakeholders to reinstate all industry-based wages councils in the country to enhance workers' engagement in labor mobility scheme as well. The industry-based wages councils is expected to work on a tripartite basis with representatives from government, employers, and workers, and their main goal would be to determine a decent minimum wage for the different sectors. Furthermore, as I alluded to earlier, labor laws that were put in place to curtail workers' rights and union leaders' rights in the past are now being reviewed. In fact, as soon as our government took office, within weeks, we made sure that we had a tripartite forum appointed as per ILO Convention 144, which means equal representation from workers, employers, and government. And at the first meeting of this Employment Relations Advisory Board, a subcommittee was appointed to go through the labor law review that had been due for over a decade, a commitment that we had made to ILO in 2016, but we never kept it. And we are now in the process of revising those laws, and once we have reviewed, all the workers' rights will be reinstated. In fact, they have been reinstated in practice. It's just now getting the paperwork done. Ladies and gentlemen, I am happy to share with you that we as a government are making sure that all our people are treated equally, treated fairly, and looked after. And we are particularly conscious of the poor and the marginalized, including workers who are underemployed, workers who might not have the best of what they should have. And of course, we make sure that our businesses thrive. Our employers are also equally important for us. So, in other words, what we are striving to do is to bring people together and harmonize the workplaces so that we are able to become a productive and happy workforce in businesses as we develop together. Ladies and gentlemen, I must also, express my gratitude to the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance for making sure that the budget that we have just gone through, we have passed, is taking good care of all the social policies that our government espouses. And indeed, our people are very happy with the way we have begun. With these few words, or too many words, I guess, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a very, very productive week. And I hope when you go back, Dr. Naren Prasad has come all the way from Geneva. And we are all hopeful that when we go back to our countries, our tripartite bodies will be strengthened and we will work together as governments, employers, and workers' representatives to ensure that social justice prevails. Thank you, Vinakavakali.
My colleague, Honorable Agni Deo Singh, Minister for Employment, Productivity and Industrial Relations, Mr. Christian Viegelahn, Officer in Charge, ILO Office in Suba for the Pacific Islands, my friend Dr. Naren Prasad from the Kheti, having two Prasads in the same hall, not sure about that. Bula Vinaka, and good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm and huge welcome to Fiji, especially for, I'm not sure if there are first-time visitors, but if you are, of course, we welcome you very warmly. And many of you, I guess, are regulars from the Pacific, whom Fiji is like second home, so welcome back. I want to begin by recording my immense appreciation to the International Labour Organization for this invitation. When I received this, I knew that Honorable Agni Deo Singh is going to be here. I thought one was enough, but now you have two. And besides, what attracted me more was this whole word about evidence-based policy making. Such workshops, in my view, are important opportunity for policy makers, practitioners, those in academia, civil society, and other stakeholders to share knowledge, best practice, and promote the use of evidence and data in making policy while facilitating and enhancing tripartite dialogue. As Ahmad said, I spent 28 years as an academic, researching, publishing, teaching, and advising many Pacific governments, and also doing work for international organizations on economic policies, trade policies, environmental policies. And so I understand the critical importance of evidence-based policy making. Naturally, both qualitative and quantitative indicators are very, very important, and it should always be the basis for decision making. I know that Dr. Naren Prasad and I have done some work together when he was with UNRIST, which is again, and then with ILO, and I appreciate his immense experience and contribution not only for policy makers, tripartite groups in the Pacific, but throughout the world and in many other regions. And it's always a pleasure to welcome Naren back in Fiji. I know there is a a wonderful maxim, old one, which goes like this: not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. That maxim perhaps gives rise to some groundbreaking approaches to economics, where the gross national happiness or well-being became markers of economic development rather than GDP. Of course, in our own Pacific neighborhood, we had some trailblazers from our Melanesian wonteds in Vanuatu, and I know that representatives from Vanuatu were here, who themselves launched the Melanesian Wellbeing Indicators Initiative in 2010, led by the Vanuatu National Statistics Office. Soon after, Bhutan started it. So that's an important initiative, coming out from Vanuatu National Statistics Office. Just days ago, the Buvale or Family Partners in Australia released a report titled Measuring What Matters, and a dashboard to measure indicators because of deficiencies in effective monitoring of fundamental national issues. The government of Australia has made progress on life expectancy, reducing resource use, diversity, incomes and employment. But they found that those measures, measures that effectively gauge issues of chronic health conditions, national security, biodiversity, fiscal sustainability had all declined. The Australian Treasury report notes that 13% of Australians reported mental health problems, and half the population has one or more chronic health conditions. Naturally, those kinds of shifts or policy shifts in thinking and counting approaches is also making our coalition government ponder deeply, because the Australian economy is strong and its most recent budget announcement was a surplus budget. Why is this relevant to what you as experts will deliberate on? It is, in my view, highly relevant in the context of what I said a little while ago. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. There are very real opportunities for all of you to ensure that evidence-based policy is based on solid numbers, facts, and even anecdotes. I would also encourage you to remember the hard lessons we learned from COVID-19 and explore any early warning alerts in your evidence-based strategies that can help mitigate risks and future-proof policies as best as possible. After all, policy changes are costly and not conducive to investor confidence when certainty is not guaranteed. And we here in Fiji fully understand the dire consequences of haphazard policy making and implementation over the last several years. If there is anything that we can or you can learn from our experience, it is to never allow your independent institutions for evidentiary national data gathering analysis to be gutted and manipulated to suit political agenda. Such was our sorry experience with the National Bureau of Statistics, the Office of the Auditor General, amongst other institutions whose independence were almost neutralized by the previous government. It is a sad and sorry legacy left behind by those who didn't give a damn to evidence-based policy making and led us almost to the brink of abyss. And this has resulted in our coalition government allocating more taxpayer funds to rebuild these core institutions. We are currently reviewing our Statistics Act, our Audit Act, so that there is no interference, there is independence of these institutions. And the portrait of the nation that we want to build is going to be based on the independence, the transparency, and the accountability of these independent institutions. Governments must be able to get unfiltered truths in real time so that when new and emerging issues arise, we can mitigate risk and realign our policy and legislative approaches as quickly as possible. To give you an example, one issue that the coalition government is having to contend with, and my colleague Honorable Agni Deo Singh did talk about a few of those, is skill shortages in key areas such as construction, nursing, specialist fields like telecommunications, engineers, aviation safety regulators, amongst others. And I know that the issue is multifaceted. Many Pacific Island nations like ours, yours, will always grapple with brain drain and the attraction of better salaries and wages, in other countries. So this is a very, very important factor as well when we look at decent work, when we look at evidence-based policy making and how we can deal with it. I have to say that the Fiji experience was gravely worsened by mismatched policies, such as the previous government, without consultation, introduced the education curriculum that was more akin to social engineering, where pass marks were heavily scaled, forcing more tertiary education enrollments, with those lower or no employment at the other end of the spectrum, forcing students and their parents or guardians to default on loan repayments. Payments to the state that were taken to be as loans for the tertiary education. Our workforce planning capability was not in step with our tertiary education opportunities and unemployment statistics. Our technical and vocational facilities were set up and then suddenly disbanded, forcing unemployment of staff and creating huge uncertainty for students. Our forced retirement age policy, as mentioned by Honorable Singh, unfair pension contributions, and he talked about short-term contracts, etc. within the civil service. And all this had a somewhat cascading effect, leading to lack of morale, low productivity, and these things were never measured. There was no evidence produced to decide the options. And these were quite simply disjointed policies that created chaos and confusion. We as a government, we are fully determined to roll back all the policy incompetence that the nation had to endure for the last 16 years. And this has already started with the repeal of some of the draconian regressive legislations, including the media decree, so that the media is able to put the government, people like us, on the spot, demand answers, demand evidence of policy prescriptions. So the last so many years in our country, and this is a good lesson for all other countries, not only in the Pacific but generally, about short-term gain which can leave us with a lot of long-term pain. And we as a government, we are determined to change that style. We have started evidence-based policy making in terms of fixing our education system. We looked at the loan system, the repayments. We looked at the data, and we realized that $650 million that was owed to government is not going to come back, and that we had to forgive that loan and put in place a system of scholarship which was going to produce a much better outcome in terms of workforce planning and skill development generally, which will lead to decent work as a final and better outcome. We're restoring the evidence-based value for money processes so that our infrastructure is maintained, developed, and one that provides value for money. Rebuilding our public health and medical delivery services that were left in a state of decay, and initiating plans to uplift our people from poverty, but at the same time increasing welfare payments. I understand that it is absolutely vital for us as a government to ensure that we collect enough revenue, but at the same time direct those revenue into areas where the quality of life of people matters: social welfare, education, and health. I know that a lot of wisdom and knowledge resides in people like yourselves outside of government a lot of the times, with the trade unions, with employers, with NGOs, and of course, civil servants, bureaucrats. If they work with this group, they can all benefit from those knowledge and wisdom. As Minister Singh has said, this government has quickly restored the tripartite arrangements that we used to have prior to 2006 coup, and we firmly believe that the rights of workers in all respects must be restored, and the best way to deal with that is to have a tripartite structure. And that's what our new coalition government has done. I know that there will be a lot more that you will discuss amongst yourselves in the next few days, but I do hope that there will be much more understanding, as Dr. Naren Prasad said, the interface between policy and research and data. I know for politicians, for governments, politics is very important. Sometimes good policies may not necessarily be good politics, or good economics may not be good politics. But that can be cut through, that can be addressed through proper data, proper evidence, and you can only have proper evidence, proper data, if the process of collecting that evidence, the resources for collecting that data is adequate. And this is why I've always been a fan of our national statistical offices. I was personally involved in developing the official statistics program at the University of the South Pacific. And one of the objectives of that program was to train enough people in the Pacific who would have a better handle of the imperatives of collecting good data, analyzing that data, and translating those analyses into what Naren talked about, policy briefs for the bureaucrats, but more importantly for the politicians, because the buck stops there. And unless you have good, solid data, good, solid evidence on which to make those policies, legislations, regulations, the unintended consequences of uninformed policies, uninformed laws can be quite devastating. So I am very pleased that the ILO has organized this workshop. Naren, I think this is probably one of the first ones in the Pacific. And I think it is timely for not only us here in Fiji, but for every country in the Pacific and beyond. Once again, thank you for the invitation, and I wish you well, and happy to declare your workshop open. Thank you.
It is a great pleasure to open this workshop on evidence-based policy making for decent work. And it's a particular pleasure to provide these welcoming remarks to you for this course. It's great to see this course happening in this region. And I'm not only saying this because my personal history is somehow connected to the ILO research department with whom we are organizing this as ILO Office for Pacific Island countries. But I also do think that it's great to have really this in-person training in this region. And I know, Naren, that you've gone quite a bit on world tour with this training. I was involved also in my previous role in a couple of previous editions. And it's just great to see you all here in the room, having come all the way to Fiji, for those that are from the other countries. Evidence-based policy making for decent work. So why is that an important topic? And I would like to just give 3 reasons for that. So first of all, you are all leaders or in important positions in your respective organizations, whether government, employers or workers. So you are the ones that are shaping the policy of your country. Those in government, of course, do have the prime responsibility for designing and implementing these policies, but then all of you are part of this consultation and have the opportunity, or should have the opportunity, to provide your inputs. And I think today it's not really sufficient to just say, yeah, so this is the policy that I'm standing for because I like it, or I think it's a good idea. That's not enough, and I think it has never been enough, probably. So what is really important is to base your policy options on solid evidence, whether quantitative evidence, so that's data, or qualitative evidence, which is basically to hear and to listen to people that are involved in certain areas and to really try to design your policies based also on what we know, on what has been tried, maybe also in other countries, even though of course the Pacific context is very specific. Second of all, I think it's important to also be critical, because I think evidence can be abused, misused. And I'm not talking here only about fake news, but I'm also talking about intentionally maybe misinterpreting data or interpreting in a way that someone would like it to see. And of course, I trust that all of you are not engaging in that practice, but I think it's very important to be aware that evidence can also be misused or abused, and I think it's important, to have this mindset to approach evidence with a little bit of critical mind, to kind of really see whether what sounds nice is really so nice in the end. And I think the last point is really that I think it's important for you to simply, when designing policies, to simply, to just look at the evidence, at the data, and to really try to take this on board, take this into account, because this is very important for your country, to really design policies that are of benefit to all, and if some of the groups might not benefit from it, then to also address those potential adverse effects that one or the other policy actually might have. So it is important to be aware of that these adverse effects might exist. So how does this link to our work that we are doing in the Pacific Island Countries Office in Suva? So I think one very important and strong link is with the work that we are doing to support you countries in this region when you conduct labor force surveys, because that's one important source of evidence, source of data. And we are just actually about to organize a workshop for the national statistics offices, but also for other stakeholders, for Fiji, Cook Islands, and Tonga, because these are the countries that are actually about to run a new labor force survey. And it's just, so with these trainings, we just aim to provide a technical input so that the surveys are designed in a sound way and produce data on an internationally comparable basis, which then can actually be used as an input into the policy making. And of course, we also support you on different areas related to the labor market, employment policies, wage policies, social protection policies, entrepreneurship policies, or measures where we give technical advice, and we try also to do that, to do what we can to base this advice on best practice, on solid evidence. And so this is why it is important to really implement measures that are based on evidence, and that we really don't do the same mistakes twice, ideally, but really take into account what works best, what has shown to work best in different contexts. And this is, I think, what we are partially here for, attending this training. So with this, I really wish you all a very successful workshop. I encourage you to actively participate, actively engage, and also to take home the knowledge that you gain, spread it within your constituencies, so that we can really generate the biggest possible impact out of this training. So with this, I would like to conclude my brief welcoming remarks and thank you again for coming here. And I'm really looking forward to the coming days with you. Thank you very much.
Honorable Professor Biman Prasad, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Strategic Planning and National Development and Statistics of Fiji, Honorable Agni Deo Singh, Minister for Employment, Productivity and Industrial Relations, Fiji, colleagues, dear participants. On behalf of my director, Rick Summons, I would like to welcome you to this Pacific Islands Regional Training on Evidence-Based Policy Making for Decent Work. While the ashes of the World War I was still burning, there was a move by the victors to create an organization that would promote peace through social justice. Conditions of labor, such as injustices, hardships, privation, leads to unrest. So during the peace conference in 1919, over 100 years ago, ILO was established. Universal and lasting peace can be established only if it's based on social justice. You may want to look into what were the first 6 international labor standards or conventions that were adopted in the first sitting. And that's something that we'll be looking into later on over the week. After the Second World War, in 1944, when our parents were born, the ILO said that labor is not a commodity. Labor is not a commodity. Poverty anywhere constitutes a danger to prosperity everywhere. The Philadelphia Declaration of ILO provided an impetus for several other groundbreaking conventions, and I'm sure most of you know the Convention on Freedom of Association, the C87, was adopted in 1948. The right to organize and collective bargaining in 1949, the C98, what we call Equal Remuneration Convention in 1951, what we call this Convention 100. The abolition of forced labor came into being in 1957, or what we call the Convention 105, and the Discrimination Convention 111 in 1958, the groundbreaking convention. The Minimum Age Convention was adopted in 1973 when I was 3 years old. And hence I was lucky to go to the school rather than to be employed as a child like my parents. This was further enforced in 1999 with the worst forms of child labor, C-182. And recently 2 occupational health and safety issues or conventions have been included in the fundamental conventions, the C-155 and C-187. Now we have 11 fundamental conventions, and the Pacific Islands is lagging behind ratifying those conventions. And we'll be talking about that, why we're looking at the evidence why it's not ratified. Dear participants and colleagues, this training on evidence-based policy making means a lot to me personally, but also to the research department. It originated from the idea that we need to bring research to the policymakers. In other words, bridging the gap. I think it really also came from the idea that when we talk to policymakers like yourselves, we talk about lots of different topics. We talk about economic growth, climate change, migration, skills, labor market issues, unemployment, social security, workers' rights, among others. And I think typically a lot of times when you do these kind of trainings, you really focus around one topic. Either it's workers' rights, conflict resolution, labor market issues. But all these various trainings are in fact connected in the policy making process. You can't treat them in silos. So for example, if you are thinking about job creation for youth, it cannot be disconnected from the economic growth or aggregate demand, tax policies, fiscal policies of getting resources, and the redistribution element is extremely important. The demographics into pension issues, and these are all interconnected. And I think what we are trying to do is to bring various ILO experts, you'll see over the week, and other experts with a wide range of expertise in these topics who will give you a bigger picture and talk about these different areas. In addition to the substance that we are talking about, what makes this training stand out is the choice of the participants yourselves. You have been selected recognizing your potential as future change makers. As an outcome of this training, we will guide you through the process of identifying a policy issue that you are passionate about and equip you with the necessary skills, tools, and instruments to produce insightful analysis through a policy brief. In other words, we will help you draft a short policy brief by the end of this week. Distinguished guests, colleagues and participants, some of you might already know that ILO was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 1969 for promoting peace through social justice. 1969 also marked its 50th anniversary of ILO. And after receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, an endowment fund was created in 1970, 1 million Norwegian kronas. And that fund has been set aside in ILO, and that fund is being used now to train people like you. So the training comes from the Nobel Peace Prize. So you have been selected to continue with this legacy of the training course in its current and modernized way. So congratulations on that. So with this rich history about ILO and where it comes from, this training course on evidence-based policy making for decent work will provide you with the tools and instruments for using evidence in order to advocate, in order to develop and influence policies in your countries. Today we have 25 participants from 11 countries from the Pacific Islands, 7 employers, 5 workers, and 13 governments. There is so much experience and diversity within this group, and this will make our learning even more interesting and enriching. I wish you a successful learning journey and a very fruitful training. Thank you for being here. Thank you very much.